and somebody else coming in here. And so agenda-wise, I didn't make a PowerPoint because mostly our time is set for JC, and then if we have time at the end, we'll talk about what we're reading. And I always like to do the celebrations and frustrations a little bit too. So that's really kind of the agenda for the day. I do want to apologize to everybody that I haven't got the recording up of last Thursday yet. It has been a, what word do I want to use? Cacophony of weird technology issues. So last week I used the main computer that's here in this classroom. It took an hour to convert the video after we were finished. So then I came up the next day and put it on a flash drive, which took another hour. And then when I got the flash drive down to where, you know, I want to transfer it, it wasn't coming off. So it took me a couple days to figure that out. Finally got that figured out yesterday, and I just have been in meetings all day today. So hopefully I'll get that one up. Don't worry about the due date on the reflection. So that's all right. And yeah, so I just wanted to make that announcement. So I'd like to welcome JC Jeffers as a guest lecturer here today. We're so excited to have her. And I'm just gonna let her kind of introduce herself to you, give you all a little background of what she's been doing, and then I'll let her take it over. And JC, if you want to share your screen, I've got that set for you to do that, so you're welcome to do so.
So hello everyone. I just want to thank all of you. Oh, I was looking at that site. For being here and your commitment to education. I have been teaching for, this is my 20th year. I laugh because this is my niece's first year teaching, and she calls me at the end of the day and I get to experience the first years of teaching all over again. And sometimes every year feels like the first year, and this year has felt that way with remote learning. I've been in Indian education for, this is my 4th year. I've taught elementary, I'm K-12 certified, and secondary ed social studies. And I have a master's degree in curriculum. So that's been my focus for the last couple of years. I've been a member of the Little Shield Tribe my whole life, but we are currently now federally recognized. And I was born and raised in Billings. I've lived here my whole life. I'm a product of Billings Public Schools. And so my journey has been a very interesting and sometimes tumultuous one here in Billings, Montana, being native, but not necessarily looking native. And so navigating the world of what I was experiencing at school. And then I think about Indian education, and I had really great teachers who were teaching about Indian education long before it was law. And going from that with my 5th grade teacher to, you know, now and working with, you know, post-grad students or, you know, teachers who are in this for their 2nd career, which I always commend the 2nd careers, because I think, man, you've got to really be committed to education to want to do this as a 2nd career, because most people, the average is 7 years in education is how long most people last. And so that's a pretty staggering number. And we have all sorts of reasons and research behind why that might be. But my focus is obviously cultural education. And I love what I do, and I love working with teachers, and I love working with pre-service teachers, especially. That's what I'm working on for my thesis, is most effective and best practices for college universities in order to better prepare people for the classroom and the demographics that they're going to face. I like to start out with questions, because then I already have your survey and what you guys did, but I think it's a good place to start as well, because it helps kind of get that out of the way, and then I can address and figure out, okay, I can add this in here or provide another resource, because it seems like you get to the end and you don't have those questions or the time at the end sometimes. So what do you guys have for me personally in the classroom, in my experience, any things that you've thought about, you know, just burning questions? There's no there's no way you could possibly ever offend me, and I'm not easily offendable. I think those are sometimes the best kinds of questions. So if you want to just chime in, I don't know what your guys' protocol is or your norm
Let's,
for.
if you could stop sharing your screen for the questions, that way we could all see each other a
Well-
little more. And if my two that are here in class have questions, I'll turn this around so she can see you
Awesome.
on that. So do either of you have questions to start with? No? Shiva? Okay, they need a few minutes to think. Anybody in the virtual world want to start us off?
Yes. Rachel?
Oh, make sure you need to unmute.
Muted.
Hi.
There
Can
you
you hear
are.
me?
Yep, now we can
Okay.
hear you.
This might be funny because I'm actually in my car, so I stopped the video.
That's
But I
fine.
do want to be an active participant in this conversation. So my burning question for this seminar is how to incorporate Indian education for all in something that's like a very active culture. Like I always feel like I'm teaching about this culture that's like a historic thing that has like no connection to what's going on in real life now. I feel like it always turns out to be something that's like, disassociated with here and now. And it always ends up being like a history lesson. So that's kind of one of my questions is how to make it a now thing, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, that's good.
Okay.
I'm not going to answer that right now because that is exactly, hopefully, where we're going to go. And that is so profound that you're thinking about that. There's so much in here that's hopefully going to help you to answer that and start you on that journey to move from the historical to the contemporary. That's a great question. Rachel, what's your major? What is your area of concentration?
Just K through 8
Okay.
curriculum.
Perfect. So your curriculum as well. So you're just getting.
So all the students that are in this class are they're graduate students who already have a degree, and they've come back to school for teaching. And so most of them are in our curriculum and instruction master's program.
Mm-hmm.
Some are getting, in addition to the master's degree, they're also getting either an elementary license, or they're in a secondary field getting a secondary license.
Are most of y'all teaching too already? Okay, good. Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah, a lot of them are either class 5 or on internship, and they're teaching full time. We do have a handful though that aren't, that are just in the programs and doing that.
Awesome.
Oh, good. We have a question in here. Let me try to turn my computer around with all the cords and everything. Or you know what? Would you mind just coming up here and I'll move? Okay. Chiwa's got a question, so she's just going to come get in front of the camera.
One of the things that we've been doing is Zooming in our classrooms.
Hi.
That's been pretty interesting too.
I don't know if that's a big question or I don't know where to start. So I just have been wondering, how can we teach IEFA in a way that, we're not native. And I know some native people, they will feel like, what do you know about us? And you're teaching our culture, our stuff, but we're not teaching in a way that we're super authentic or anything. But we need to adjust that. So how can we teach that in a way that we're not so offensive to the parents, but we also address enough to make people aware of the topic or what they need to know, or not too intense that we're crossing the border of what the government want us to teach. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of topics that are kind of sensitive
Sure.
that,
Yeah.
like, you know, in reality, probably the government doesn't want us to talk too much about. You know
I know
what?
what you mean. Yeah.
So
I
I don't know, do you know what I mean? Like, how can we find that balance that we want to teach enough, but not too intense?
If the government wanted us to teach about it, we would already know, right? Because I mean, in my world and my conversations, it's genocide.
Yes.
Our
And the
government committed
historical
genocide.
trauma, all that
Yep.
boarding school
Absolutely.
stuff that like the government don't even want to mention about, you know?
Right. And we don't want to induce more trauma in our students, or whether they're Native or not. And how do we do that in a responsible way? Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. Hopefully we'll touch on that a little bit today too. So that's good. I appreciate that question so much, because that's the balance, and finding that balance. So yeah, hopefully in an authentic way. I like it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for asking that, Chiba.
Yeah.
That's an important one. I know that, I mean, I taught kindergarten in Oregon, and every year Thanksgiving really was the toughest, you know, curriculum time for what I was doing in kindergarten. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that.
Yeah, and I do a 2-hour session on Thanksgiving, and we get to touch pretty close on that. And it's a journey, you know, when I go through the class. But one of the biggest takeaways I think that teachers get from the Thanksgiving is that Thanksgiving is an American holiday. It's not an Indigenous holiday.
Right.
Nobody wants to take Thanksgiving away from you, but please don't dress up as Indians and pilgrims, you know, in your class. You can do that. You can do whatever you want at home, but probably not in your classroom, probably not in a public institution. Because if you look at the history and you look at what it was actually for, somewhere along the way, as history does, it was, there's myth and misconception associated for whatever reasons. And when I was growing up, we still celebrated Thanksgiving, but we knew what we were celebrating. We were celebrating an American holiday and being thankful for, really, it was actually the Union and the reunification of the North and the South in the Civil War, because Lincoln made it a federal holiday. So it wasn't it was celebrated, not officially, but in communities all over for various reasons, but as a federal holiday. And if it's something that we celebrate in our schools, it's important to be historically accurate. So that was the punchline for a 2-hour session that we teach. But Sarah, gosh, what is, I don't know her last name. I'd have to shift my brain. But it's Sarah, I think it's Sarah Hill. Do you remember the gal's name that writes the letter? What's that?
Sarah Keller?
Yes, it might be. Yeah. She writes the letter. So super complicated topic, but Thanksgiving, nobody wants to take Thanksgiving away, but try to be historically accurate about it. Yeah.
And I'll just add one little tiny question onto that one, not that you have to answer it tonight, but so if you are trying to be, you know, more sensitive and teaching curriculum through this lens that we're talking about, but your colleagues are still, you know, doing the banquet with the pilgrims and the you know, Indians kind of a thing, how you kind of navigate those professional relationships in the midst is something I'd be interested in too.
I think the shortest, sweetest answer I can give to that is you do you. Let them do them. And we can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do, but I truly feel, and I've experienced this in being in history departments, and I taught world history and psychology and sociology for years and years. And my kids loved it. They loved learning about culture. They loved the misconceptions. And then they go out and they're talking about these things. And it's kind of a build it, they will come mentality. And my department head, who was just this, you know, bless his little heart, but he was just very kind of set in his ways. And it was an additive kind of thing that he, you know, here's the, oh, by the way, you know, this is what was happening with American Indians at the time. But he started to come to me more in how to not only connect with Native students so that we can help them achieve more, because they are the lowest achieving demographic in Montana, but more accurate history as well. And so I try to approach it in a non-combative way, because if I'm doing this, I'm doing the exact opposite of what, number one, my culture tells me that I should be doing, and the heritage that I've been asked to give to other people, because that's not our way. But at the same time, that's not multicultural education. It's about providing voice and a platform for everybody to share and express their ideas. And in a situation where somebody's not as informed as someone else, we guide them towards a more informed decision or perspective. So sometimes it can be really tough. I had this lady come up to me the other day. She's like, how did you find out you were Indian? Did you do the 23andMe? And I'm like, what is 23? What is 23andMe? Like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. And then when I found out what it was later, I was angry for a long time. I think, I was called Chippewa growing up. I heard a lot of the prairie N-word, growing up from kids. There wasn't a lot of Native kids at Skyview where I graduated from. And so I experienced some prejudice, kids that didn't want to hang out with us as soon as they met my father, because he is obviously Native. And, so I went through a period where I was pretty angry and I was reactionary. So now I try to take a more proactive approach, but that took years and years. And so in that regard, students are going to take that too, because even knowing what I know and having the historical background that I did, it still took a lot in the classroom for me to build trust and respect. Any kid, it takes a while to build trust and respect with, right? And then you're talking about children that have experienced generational trauma, a government that still has not recognized what it has done, won't even entertain the idea of genocide, refuses to apologize. The closest we've ever gotten is Obama, where we have an apology in Canada, doesn't mean the situation is any better. We have an apology in Australia, but we don't here in the United States. And, Mexican people that are majority Indigenous as well. And so, you have kids, those are very real things that our kids are dealing with when they go home. And it's a reality for us. I've told my friends throughout the years things that I heard growing up or things that were said to me. And they're like, you guys, like, I didn't even know that existed. And it's like secret. We don't share that with people because it's traumatic. And I didn't even want to admit that I was Native for a long time, because when I was a kid, my grandma was like, loud and proud, you're Native, you're Indian, you tell people it. And then I experienced prejudice, and then I didn't, because I'm an urban Indian too. And then I experienced racism or prejudice or bias from my own people, where I wasn't Native enough because I don't have a reservation in Montana. So, there's a lot of dynamics that go in, and not everybody's going to be the same either, right? We're all going to experience things differently. So I try to do it with an open heart and just realize that people don't know what they don't know. And we try to help them in their path, and hopefully, we can make better informed decisions and not cause more trauma, do it in an authentic way and in a contemporary way. So with that, do we have any more questions? And then I'll kind of walk through some of this stuff a little bit more in depth.
One question that I have is with being in math, as far as like to integrate it into the curriculum, it's a little bit more challenging, and especially with the higher level maths and stuff. So maybe a little bit of even a direction to go with that, or some places to start looking for more information with that, because it kind of seems to be a taboo thing, even though it's important, but nobody can give guidance on where to go, but they expect it to be done. So
right. And hopefully we'll look at that a little bit too. Different content areas are going to lend themselves towards more in-depth, or and especially, you think about the curriculum itself. Math is a tough area. We do have some pretty amazing lessons, and that's where we'll look at the end at in a history class or a literature class, it's going to lend itself more to transformative thinking, right? Where math, it's going to be additive, but we're going to do that. We can still do that in a meaningful and authentic way that is going to entice students to discover more for themselves. And so there's levels, right, and dimensions within multicultural education and Indian education. I mean, they might end up with kind of the same things over and over again, but that's okay on some level, because everybody's going to have a different perspective and age and those kinds of things. I was just looking at our trig lesson today for the medicine wheel, and we've done some fantastic things with trigonometry and the medicine wheel and stars and those kinds of things. So there's some really good lessons that you can go deep into. And I think the best thing to do is really, and we'll talk about this more, is start with those lessons, and then the craft and the knowledge and perspective starts to come in, and you start to see it all over. I remember when we first started this journey, people were like, how are we going to do this in science? And to me, that was one of the easiest places to start, because everything about what we do was science. You know, our spirituality to us is science, and that's a huge concept, and I couldn't possibly cover all of that, you know, right now in, you know, an hour, but there's so much that we can do in creative ways. But if we start somewhere and then we can start to, you know, and we become familiar and comfortable, we can start to have more authentic conversations and lessons. So that's a great question too. Math is tough, especially big, you know, the trig and upper algebra and calculus and those kinds of things. So, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of look at that a little bit as well. So you guys are definitely, now I know the things I need to say in order to kind of hone in on these questions. So what we're going to kind of look at today is the survey results and how they tie in with the essential understandings, why we should teach culture every day. And the last thing is, where do I begin? And many of you have probably already started. So maybe this should be more of where do I keep going, or how do I keep going, and building momentum and keeping that momentum. So this was your guys' answer. I thought this was pretty great, because this has definitely changed over the years. When I first started doing this and teaching level 1 training, we have that available for teachers in the school district. It's part of our contract in Billings Public Schools that you take level 1 training. And over the years, this has got this, the graph has completely flip-flopped. So I think this is pretty fantastic. It was a revolutionary mandate, as you would say, in the Montana State Constitution. It was unlike anything that had ever been written before. It wasn't by American Indian people. So it, and along with that was a part of the statute talks about land as well, which is pretty interesting too, if you're interested in the Montana State Constitution and its revolutionary capabilities. Incidentally, it was written right after the Self-Determination Act of 1972, and that's kind of what inspired us to put that in our Constitution. So I'm glad that you guys knew this, and there's really no reason to kind of stay on it, because you guys pretty much know that. And I like that I don't have to spend time on it. I don't have to put the Constitution up there and the statute and the law and the progression of the law, because that stuff's kind of boring. Montana educators came together with tribal members to create the essential understandings, absolutely, and this is fantastic as well. And you'll notice that when we talk about standards versus essential understandings, there is a difference, but it's pretty clear how they're different, and maybe even the perspective of the two cultures, because one culture is writing understandings, one culture is writing standards. So it's pretty interesting. There's 7 essential understandings. You guys knew this as well, which is fantastic. And this is tough, you know, and how do we really differentiate between standards? And so we don't like to necessarily say, because standards, we have this idea that it goes on the wall and we check it off, and at some point we revisit those things and we reassess those things. We have formative and summative, and cycling of reciprocation of the curriculum, and we go back to these things. But when we think about the understanding, so standards are a measure, a norm, a level of attainment, but an understanding is the ability to understand and having good judgment or insight. And that's a lifelong process. I'm taking this class, Unpacking the Essential Understandings, and from some gals from Great Falls, and I have learned so much stuff, from them, and I consider myself somewhat of an expert on the essential understanding. So there's always more that you can learn, and standards kind of stay the same. They don't necessarily evolve per se. A narrative is a narrative. A character trait is a character trait. The 7 dimensions of psychology, they stay. Those are the standards. But an understanding takes on, an evolution. And so it's not that you can't put them on the wall and you can't check them off on a box, and it's not that you can't assess them, but it's ongoing, and it is reciprocal, and it's ever evolving and ever changing. This is interesting. I don't ever blame anybody for this, because it took me a long time to memorize it, but it's just rote memorization. There are 12 tribes in Montana. I think the 7 comes from the misconception about reservations. 13, I think that comes from the fact that the Assiniboine tribe is on 2 reservations. And so that's the same tribe, only they're federally recognized on 2 different reservations. And so even the Chippewa and Cree of Rocky Boy are also recognized. It's the same group with Turtle Mountain in North Dakota. It was a very strategic plan by the United States government to split up our people. And so there are 12 tribes. I don't know where the 8 came from, but it's all good. And so I couldn't explain that one. That was just the outlier. So how many reservations? There are 7. Soon we will have 8, with the Little Shell being federally recognized. And so I kind of gave, the heave ho for the 8 there. And then the 12, it would be really nice if all 12 tribes had reservations, but that's not the reality. And we have situations in Montana where the federal government put conflicting tribes together on the same reservation as a way to maybe cause animosity. And there are sometimes still between the Assiniboine and Sioux of Fort Peck. And so there's a lot of history that goes into those things that happened in the creation of the reservations that still exist today. And so I think that this is a really good place to start and really start thinking about this. And if you want to give your students an authentic experience, I think it's really important to know that there are 12 federally state recognized, now federally recognized tribes, and that there are 7, possibly soon 8 tribes or reservations in the state of Montana. If you can walk into a classroom and you know that, and if you can even attempt to say some of the names of the tribes that students call that the tribes call themselves, the students are going to recognize that. Study after study shows that the more of a student's culture that is taught in a classroom, the more they achieve. And so we know correlation doesn't mean causation, but if we're not teaching Native culture and our Native students aren't achieving, what does that tell me? That tells me that maybe if I know and teach more Native culture or Native history or Native understandings, my Native students will achieve at a higher rate. So that's kind of the gist of the theory of multicultural education, starting with Du Bois in the 1890s, 1880s. So here's my favorite map. And the new reservation will be up here with the Little Shell. The land is up here, up above Fort Peck. And so I kind of have a way of remembering these. I love this map. This is probably one of my favorite maps because Hidatsa, Mandan, and Arikara are not Montana tribes. They're North Dakota tribes, or the Shoshone, or the Nez Perce, who were in Montana. We even had Arapaho and Comanche. So In Billings, we've had over 80 tribes represented at one time. And so we obviously, don't have 80, 520 or 563 recognized tribes in the United States of America. And that's a lot of tribes with their own language, their own culture, their own histories. So tribes in Montana share the same history and culture. So that lends itself right into this question. And so think about Jewish people and German people. So they do share some same history and culture, right? But they don't have the same history. And so I think what is important to remember here, it's not meant to be a trick question, but it absolutely can, and any true or false can be that way. So I apologize for that if you really do understand that, but you marked true, because I can see that as well. That of course we all share the same history and culture, but does that mean that we come from the same history and culture? No, I mean, the Little Shell people, my chief was considered quite the rebel. He hid Sitting Bull in Canada. He refused to sign treaties with the United States government, which is part of the reason we think that they weren't giving us federal recognition for a long time. So, in that sense, we all have a unique relationship with the US government. And yes, there's going to be overlap in spirituality or culture and treaties. We might have had treaties or not had treaties, but we didn't all engage in the, Sioux Wars, or, the Trail of Tears is very different. We didn't have Trail of Tears, but did every tribe experience some kind of displacement? Absolutely. But what that history actually is. So it's just a deeper understanding of the word history and culture. And I think it's really important to understand that the Crow and the Northern Cheyenne, very, very different relationships with the United States government. So their history, so it should say tribes of Montana share the same history and culture in relationship to the United States government. And absolutely, if you understand culture, when you look at language, tradition, ideologies, those are all unique and different, which is pretty cool when you think about 500, we think over 600 tribes in the US are still operating today. And then you have the blending and mixing of different cultures as well. And so this is kind of a good place to have me stop talking and you guys do some of the talking and thinking. And so what I'd like you to do is look at this essential understanding. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste it into the chat. And then I'm going to have you go to menti.com. And I'm going to give you the password. So if you're driving, please don't do this. So I'm going to copy and paste this into the chat. You're going to go to menti.com. And if you haven't done a Menti, what are they called? Mentimeters, a Mentimeter yet, it's going to ask you to put in 3 words that stand out to you. We don't have a lot of people, but it can still be very effective. If you haven't done one of these yet, I'm going to show you it here in a second as well. So you're taking the essential understanding, you're going to menti.com. The password is 2826814. 2826814. Does anybody question on where they need to go? Menti.com. Sweet. Yes, love the thumbs up. That's a Norman protocol we do with our remote kids too. The emojis as well, right? Right, you have to.
MENTEE.com?
MENTI.
Okay.
Yep, sorry about that.
Why I was getting Japanese.
It's in the chat box too, Tina, as well.
Oh, thank you.
And then I'm going to screen share and show you guys what you are putting in there. There we go. Present. And so because I've screen shared, if you have a question or you're lost, please just shout out and I will give you verbal directions.
So sorry, I didn't see what you put into, like, did you put something into the top line that said word cloud? Is that what you did?
Oh, for my end of it, like how I did it, is that what you're curious about?
Well, or what are you asking us to do with Minty?
Okay, so there's three, you should see 3 lines that ask you to put words in there, correct?
Yes.
So you're using the essential understanding number 1 and any words that stand out to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we're
Sorry
just
about that.
picking 3 words from it then?
Yep.
Okay.
And I can read that to you individually if you would like as well.
Oh, that's okay.
And if you haven't done this with kids, it's super fun. They love it. And I usually give them extra chances to put stuff in. And we've done this with norms in the classroom, and then we print it out and put it, you know, up on the wall. And I love that diversity is staying in the middle. And this is just fantastic. I try to not necessarily show it right away, but I like to watch it change too, because then kids start, you know, writing what other people wrote, but I still think it's awesome. And I like dad. I don't know necessarily where that came from, but there's also the idea that these things are invoking things in you as well, right? Because there's no really right or wrong way to do this. And if you're looking at these things, it invokes thoughts and ideas with you as well. So I love that diversity is in the middle. That's what I get almost every single time, which is exactly what we're going for. So when you go back, oh, I have to escape. And then I need to open this. So when we're looking at this, right? So if we go back and we're looking at our answer here.
You're not sharing anymore.
Oh, yeah, that could be, that's part of the, yep. Welcome to my world. The best one is when you just like go share and you're just going along and the kids are like, and you can't see them anymore. 20 minutes later and they're like, you've been muted this whole time, Miss Jeffers. You're like, oh my God. Good thing it's recorded. Okay, so if we think about diversity goes hand in hand with history and culture. And so thinking about each tribe having its own language, its own culture, its own history, its own government, its own heritage, it's pretty important to remember that. Do we share some things with each other? Absolutely. But each tribe has different things. We all have different flags. We have different, I think history is one of the biggest things. Our migration stories, our origin stories. Once you learn a lot of them, you're like, oh man, there's some similarities in them, and I can see that. Because we do believe that we evolved from the same groups of people. And we also think that the Gros Ventre people of Montana might be some of the very first people to arrive about 14,000 years ago. So just kind of mixing in some culture and science in there. I love this one. I really wanted to put up a picture of my friend Walter and I, because we're both Assiniboine as well. So I have some Assiniboine heritage as well. And we look very, very different. And then this idea, I think political and religious beliefs. We grew up Catholic, right? I didn't grow up with spiritual tribal traditions because my great grandfather was in a boarding school and he was raised Catholic, right? And so we were Catholic, and I remember asking my dad at one point, because we had these spiritual things that we did and practices, but we were Catholic, right? I was like, why are we Catholic? He's like, well, that's just what we are. And not everybody who is American Indian is Catholic. And it would sure be nice if we shared the same political beliefs, but we definitely still, there's a lot of division in Indian country about just as much and just as divided as the rest of the country is, and polarized sometimes. The sad part sometimes that we find is that folks will show up, you know, when the vote is happening, but then as soon as, you know, and I think this happens with all people, but there's a lot of things that are promised to Indian country or to a reservation or a tribe, and then once the election happens, those things do not happen as a result. And I think our biggest concern is tribal sovereignty. Just an example, you know, we don't deal with the state, excuse me, the state government. So if you think about a reservation as a completely separate country, so not only are there 50 states in the United States of America, there are also 562, I think it's 345 reservations, something like that, 340, something like that. I don't know for sure. I should know that number and I don't, I apologize. But think about those as completely separate states within the United States of America. Whether you agree with it, we could have those debates till the end of the earth, but that's the reality. The Congress, your United States government has given that, or not given that land. We reserve that land for ourselves, and they're under the protection of the United States of America. And so, and that's super long and complicated history, and there's no possible way that any of us could ever understand all of it. I mean, there's scholars obviously that do, but general understanding of that is important. We do not deal with the state. Our dealings are directly with the federal government. And so federal elections are pretty important to us as people for the reservation itself. And I don't know necessarily where I'm going with that, but it's just really important. I mean, that would be like saying all German people share the same political and religious beliefs, and we know that that's not true as well. Because Germans, there's German Jew, there's German Catholic, there's German Lutheran. And so just be thinking about, you know, this in and of itself, that if we were to say this about, you know, people from Canada or people from Mexico, so there's no possible way. And I think about me and my sister, we don't share the same political and religious beliefs as well, and we're from the same tribe. So great diversity among the individual American Indians as identity is developed, defined, and redefined by entities, organizations, and people. There is no generic American Indian. What people normally associate with, I remember I was in Boston one time, got a little heavy there, got to do something funny, and she said, I was this lady, and she, oh, where are you from? Where are you from? And Montana, you know, and she's like, oh my God, you have Indians there, don't you? And I was like, yeah, we have it. See, I try to take that stuff with a little bit of humor. Yes, we do. We do have Indians there, by the way. And yep, I teach Indian kids, and I have Indian friends, and we have Indian culture, and it's a pretty big deal out here. Yeah. So, and if you look at the United States, there aren't reservations in the East anymore, and that's a result of, you know, Indian displacement and genocide and termination policies and those kinds of things. So I don't know if you've ever looked at Indian country and then the reservations that get smaller and smaller in those maps. So it's kind of interesting to really think about, because this land was, there were, they've estimated, this is a very interesting scientific study. So they've estimated based on the amount, so we had fire burning practices that we used for our, so we would induce fire in different places in order to regenerate and rejuvenate the land. It was kind of a farming practice, and farming existed here as well, but not in the plains. It was too dry here really to farm. That's why we were still gathering and following the bison. But we had burning practices that we used to rejuvenate the land, and based on the carbon that was in the atmosphere before 1492 that was trapped in the ice caps. Super interesting study. They did it in the Beartooth. It's so interesting. It's called glacier ice archaeology, something like that. And so based on the carbon that was in the atmosphere, they were able to estimate the amount of people that existed in North America before 1492. And then the level of carbon in the atmosphere dropped significantly after 1492. And they estimated there was 180 million American Indian, indigenous people on this continent. And today there's a little over 8 million people in the United States. So whether it's through active elimination, disease, active removal policies, war, it's not the same. So those are topics to kind of explore and think about. So super interesting. I don't know if you guys like those little tidbits of information, but I love them very much. Okay, so essential understanding number 2, we're all very, very different, each one of us. So what I'd like, now I've talked too much again. So what I'd like you to do now, I'm gonna take this, copy, and I'm going to put it in the chat box. And what I'm gonna have you do is, oh gosh, you never know sometimes how to. So you're gonna take this understanding and think about how this applies to all cultures. So this is essential understanding number 2. So how could you change this? So it's not just American Indian. So what words would you change? How does this apply to all people? So words, again, thinking about words, you're gonna put it in the chat box this time. How does this apply to other cultures, not just American Indian cultures? Ah, there you go. I tried to give you an example there. It's one of my favorite ones. Remove the word trap, good. And can you change it to a particular group? So great diversity among all Mexican people, or great diversity among all German people, or? What did I do there? Oops. Oh, I can't share the Zoom screen. That's right. Where did my, I think I closed my Google. No, that's right there. Oh, it's just not open. Okay, so this is always kind of a good, why is it not there? Oh, it's not that. Hold on. There we go. I can do this. So when I think about this, this is always kind of a good place. This is where stuff starts to get a little bit uncomfortable in the classroom. And so I actually spend time doing this with my kids in the classroom. No matter the subject area, no matter, it's a way to get to know each other as well. And one thing that I like to think about is that someone once said to me, you know, I don't see color, JC. I don't see you as an American Indian. I'm colorblind. I just don't see people that well. And I looked at her in the kindest way that I possibly could. And I said, I want you to see my color. I want you to see me as an American Indian. Please don't be colorblind to who I am, because I grew up different. Whether you like it or not, I grew up different. I grew up experiencing racism and prejudice from my own people, from people that weren't part of my culture, from the person across the street. And I experienced beautiful things as well. But I want people to see that I am American Indian and I grew up differently than other people did. And that is it's a really important thing to me in regards to how we approach kids, because when you see that somebody is from a different background, you can better understand where they're coming from and have more compassion, and you can understand more about what they need in order to be able to be successful in the classroom. If I can't help this kid meet the needs that he's experiencing at home, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to help him be successful, or her. And so I implore teachers to see color and to see race and to see people from different areas of the world. Because if we just pretend that that doesn't exist, that we're all just a melting pot, then we're denying the fact that people grow up and experience things differently. Children experience things differently than adults. Women experience things differently than men. You know, no matter people from different religions. Can you imagine what it's like, the things that people experience being, you know, from an Amish community and coming to Billings? And when we don't recognize those things, it makes it very difficult to move past them. So in the classroom, and not that they're different, they're still human beings. We're human beings first, but I am from a different background, I'm from a different culture, and I want people to recognize that. And once we're in the classroom, that's when things start to get, you can see the kids start to get a little antsy in their seat, and they're like, but I was raised that everybody's the same, but we're not. We're not all the same. We are different. And should we all be treated equally? Absolutely. But are we all treated equally? Probably not. So those are the things that we need to think about, and the conversations that we need to have in our classrooms. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be sometimes traumatic for kids. But if we don't have those conversations, what are the consequences? And so moving on from that, that's just kind of my little, you know, soapbox, or as you would say, with how I've experienced things in the classroom. You might have a different perspective, and that's okay. And I don't want you to think the way that I think. But when you talk to most people of color, they usually tend to agree with that kind of statement, that I want you to see me, who I am, as my culture, and my culture is part of who I am, and how I grow up and how I see the world is part of who I am, and it's going to be different than other people's. And
Hey,
so
I have a quick question for you. Back to
Yes.
the last slide where you had that question about activities.
Yes.
Um,
Sorry. Oh gosh, I didn't realize that was, yep. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that was my question. I really love that question. I was hoping for some answers.
No, you're right. I didn't realize that was the question that I had there. You know, I have, like, I always change it. I don't know if anybody was on there before, but I like change the activity that I'm doing with the different things.
Yeah.
This is let's do a shout out. So what are some activities? So this is how you get to the uncomfortable spot, right? So we're uncovering kids' cultures in the classroom, right? because I want to know their cultures and I want everybody to see everybody is different. And we want to share those activities or those things that we experience. Because one thing that I've found in the classroom is when kids start to share, they're like, what, you guys don't all do that? And they're like, no, like that's not, so kids don't even necessarily know. We're not trying to point out that they're different. We're trying to point out, because different oftentimes is perceived as less than, right? And so somebody talks different and it sends off little chemicals in our brain that, you know, that's somebody that's not within our group. And I want to protect my group. So I have defense, you know, this is a psychologist in me coming out. We have these defense mechanisms that come forward. And so we're trying to minimize the impact that different is bad. And so what activities can you use to uncover people's cultures in the classroom? So let's go ahead and do a shout out. I'm going to stop screen sharing here. So what kinds of activities can you do to uncover culture in your classroom? What can you do in your classroom?
I'll just do a quick shout out, as I've already put something in the chat called identity text. And for those, some of you have taken or you will take art integration with me. And we do this project in it. I know Chihuahua was part of that, where it's just an amazing approach to having students share their identities in very positive ways. So speaking their identities in positive ways into their communities.
Nice. Thank you. Well, what activities do you use to get to know your students? Ask them, right? Ask them, right?
I do. I started it this year because I had a large amount of new students at my school. And I just started doing a question of the day, and it had nothing to do with subject matter. It was solely, I told them it's because we have a lot of new students here and I want to get to know them. And some days it's just really simple, like what's your favorite thing to do outside? And then sometimes I challenge them with a little bit more, like, what do you think, or if you could fix any problem in the world, what would you fix? And it invokes so much conversation. It's ridiculous with my middle schoolers sometimes. So that's worked for me.
Question of the day. I like it.
So I typed one in for Chihuahua, who's here in the classroom, and she said she enjoys reading books and stories that include students' cultures.
Absolutely. If you haven't read the book Double Not Half, I highly recommend it for every age group ever. I'm not part Irish and part Indian. I am Irish and Indian.
Okay, what's the title again? Sorry, I was looking for it.
Double Not Half.
Like not as in K-N-O-T?
No, N-O-T.
Oh, N-O-T. I don't know why I was thinking not. Well, because I'm a fiber artist. So.
Double.
Oh, she's going to type it in. Good.
Yeah, Double Not Half. So good.
Oh, there we go.
Well, and I guess we have to ask ourselves, is it important for us to know our students? I mean, right? I mean, and how much time do we spend getting to know our students? Right? And how much time could you spend on that? We used to have this saying at senior high when I taught there, and it was rigor, relevance, and relationships. Types of games oh, that's good, because that's tradition, right? Games are tradition. Good. Interest in holiday traditions. Holiday traditions are so fun because you learn really quick in the class who, you know, who might be Jewish, who might, you know, and then you're like, okay, I've got to be a little sensitive, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, because we all need to be aware all the time. I mean, we have to be some of the most politically correct people on the planet. I mean, if you want to keep your job, right? I mean, We can't just say whatever, and we can't bring in our political views. We have to be neutral. Oh yeah, I love, and you know, maybe with high schoolers, maybe be careful with the weekend plans, censor it. No. But man, sometimes, you know, if you can create a safe space where they can share too, that's, yeah, and digging deep into children are viewed and treated in different cultures. We used to look at the United Nations rights of the child when we would do developmental psychology. Kids are just so interested in how children are treated in different parts of the world, or valued, or the elderly as well, because we often look down on somebody that might be living with their parents, but in Indian culture, that's the reality. We wouldn't have it any other way. You don't send your parents to a nursing home. They come live with you. We have a saying, they wiped my butt, I'm wiping theirs. It's just payback, right? Take care of them, they take care of me. They took care of me, right? Art talks. We do some pretty specific things in our Native immersion classes that are about names, traditions, places, and that provides an opportunity. So when we have a group of kids so we do immersion programs during the summer, immersion classes where kids can take a class during the summer and get credit for it. And in those classes, it's not just American Indian students who can apply for the programs. And so when we have kids share about like their name and their tradition and place, their favorite places, they start to share these things about their culture with kids. And so then they become the teachers in the classroom. And then I can kind of sit back, and I've learned so much. Like I had Superman, right? So if you don't know who Superman is, he, you know, yeah, he's amazing, right? So I know him as Christian Parrish, right? Didn't even know for the longest time that his son was in my class. And we're just going along, and he's, you know, talking about, he's like, hey, can my dad come into class? I'm like, sure, yeah, absolutely. And here walks in, and I mean, I'd seen him at powwows, and I didn't even, you know, recognize him as, because of sociology, right? I didn't even recognize him necessarily as Superman. And he comes in and he's just talking about pro culture and identity and what it was like growing up on the res and all these different things. And I didn't even realize who he was. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of greatness, you know, MTV Movie Award winner. But like, he felt so comfortable. But then that I think is authentic, in the sense that I created a safe space for him in order to let his dad come in. And so he became the teacher, and I learned from them, right? I learned from his family and their perspective, without saying, oh, hey, you know, so-and-so, would you tell us about this? Because that's not, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but that's not appropriate either. But in the same regard, a kiddo wanted his rabbi to come in and talk. And so we invited the rabbi to come in, and another kid wanted their friend who was from Saudi Arabia to come in and talk about, this was world history, and talk about ritual and prayer and what, you know, the Islamic religion meant to them. And so, like, there's diversity. You just have to uncover it, and you have to uncover that and provide a safe space. And I spend a significant portion of time in the classroom getting to know my kids, having them write memoir. I try to tie it in with some kind of standard that we're doing. So in psychology, I would tie it in with development. So they would write memoirs that were about their past, their present, and their future. In world history, they would, my past history, my present history, my future history. So I would always try to, in writing, you can always do writing in any subject area, because everybody needs to do writing. Math, it's always, I think I'm going back to math. That's going to be a little bit tougher, but you could have them write about their experiences with math, right? So it's going to be more content driven, in the sense that you're going to get to know them and what they're like based on their experience with math, or their writing and their thinking with math. And what we found in math more so is that you look to other cultures and how they experience math, and then just bringing that in and introducing that. And then it just sparks this curiosity where kids start to open their mind to different ways to complete math problems. Like the Peloponnesians use a system of 25 where they count different parts of their body. And so when you go in, the kids are, they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, instead of, you know, we count on our fingers. So just different things like that. And that's where Deacon, I have a dog that is barking right now. He's like, who are you talking to, Mom? I'm talking to these people on the TV. They're fabulous. Okay, so let's see here. It's getting late, guys. Are you feeling overwhelmed yet? Do we need to do a debrief? Actually, I think we're gonna go into rooms. Let me see. I think we do. So, essential understanding number 3. So you guys all knew this one. Oh, I was going to give you an activity that kind of goes with this. So this is a little bit more tangible activity that you can do with kids that really can help you understand. And I think you could tie this in with math somehow, do some trees or something, some counting or some kind of, you know, Fibonacci's code or something with leaves. But maybe you've seen the cultural iceberg. And so one thing that I do with my kids is I ask them, how is culture like a tree? So this is more of an indigenized version of the cultural iceberg. And so we see this part of the tree, right? We see the leaves, we see and the leaves are really what's visible, right? But then the branches underneath are a little less visible. And then underneath, which is really the base of the tree, because without the roots, it doesn't get nourishment, it doesn't stay in the ground. But these are the things that are really who we are, and the deep things that make us who we are, but they're not seen in every day. And how do we get kids to feel comfortable to be here? And so what I do is I have them do that exercise, and you know, how is a tree like culture? And they don't necessarily really know, and they have some ideas, and culture is a pretty difficult thing for kids to understand in general. But then how do we uncover this? So then I have students, so they have like food. Well, what is your food? What are these things that we can see about you that you have? Hairstyle, and they're even part of you know, we're all part of multiple different cultures. We're American, we have our ethnicity, we have our religion might be another culture that we're part of. And then we have our generation. So as teenagers, so when you have kids that maybe are adopted or don't know where they're from, that's where you kind of, well, you're a teenager. What's your hairstyle as a teenager? And what kind of dance do you guys like? And so you have them start to think about those things in the multiple cultures that they're part of. And then we start to see similarities in students as well. So they go and they're like, okay, I'm a teenager, and we're all teenagers, and we're all dealing with and struggling with the same things because we share some history and culture. And so I actually have my kids go through and do this. I'm always trying to think about math and science. You have this be a lead-in lesson because you're always uncovering culture and always talking about culture, and then you lead it into a study on roots or aspen trees and how they multiply, or Fibonacci's code or something like that. So do we need a debrief there as far as how we would use the cultural iceberg? Does that kind of, I went through that pretty quick, but that's just a tangible lesson that you can kind of use with kids.
Do you have like handouts on that, or is there like some resource we could go to for a lesson like that?
Let's see. I know the cultural iceberg does. And so what I did is let me put this in the chat box. So if you Google cultural iceberg lesson, it'll give you kind of a walkthrough of questions and scaffolding to walk through with kids. And I just took that and turned it into a tree, because it's just more indigenized. Trees are living and they're part of the earth. And so I've just turned it into more of an indigenized lesson. But the iceberg's super cool too. I used that for years. So if you Google that, it's there.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Let me share screen again here. Let's see. Okay, so the next one you guys had, history is subjective. I love this. I was so happy that this was the answer, because when I was in high school, I would, as soon as I got into US history, I went to class, and the first day I come home and my dad says, "What did you learn today?" I was like, "Well, we did, you know, rules and stuff." And he, "Okay, well, tomorrow come back and tell me what you learned." So I come back the next day, "What'd you learn today?" I'm like, "I don't know, we were talking about Restoration and Lincoln and, you know, because this is, you do the second half of after the Civil War." And he said, "All right, well, let me tell you the indigenous version of what was happening in the United States of America." So I would go home and I learned a different history. And I often got in trouble because I would challenge my teachers. And my dad didn't like that very much either, because no matter the authority, you're still not supposed to be disrespectful. And so I had to really kind of tone it back and find more respectful ways to challenge my elders and my teachers. And so as time went on, I learned how to better and, you know, approach the subject matter and be more respectful. And that's what we try to do with our kids as well. But if you open yourself up, you're going to have students that are eventually going to challenge your perspective. And if you aren't open to being wrong or challenged in your perspective, those kids are going to shut down. And so the fact that you know oral tradition and know just makes me so happy for all of our Indigenous students all throughout the state, because oral tradition is just as valid and as important. Our oral stories, some linguists would tell you, are more valid than written story, because there's more cognitive and brain synaptic connections that go into oral tradition than necessarily written history. So one isn't necessarily more valid than the other, but it's just as valid. And so I think that's really important. They don't change. Our stories aren't supposed to change. We're meant to sit and listen and comprehend without necessarily taking notes. So just kind of a little tidbit on that. If you do have Indigenous students in your classroom, they might not take notes, and try to be open to the idea that we might be able to listen and not take notes and totally comprehend what's going on, because we've been trained to do that on some level. Not necessarily always true, but just be open to the possibility, I suppose, right? And we know this because everybody learns differently. So just because, you know, saying you have to take notes isn't necessarily always applicable to every student. And so what I'd like to do now is put you, okay, so let me go back just a second. So I think, you know, Miss Obery, Dr. Obery, we both know her very well. And how our journey kind of started is we were having a conversation and talking about pre-service teachers. And she said, so we asked students to do one lesson. And is that, you know, turn in your Indian Ed lesson, right? You need to do your Indian Ed lesson. So this is part of the curriculum, and you're looking at the syllabus and you're saying, okay, I got to do my Indian Ed lesson is due on November 10th, and Indian Education Day is on October 12th, or whatever it is, right? And we just kept thinking about that, and how my culture is every single day, just as your culture is every single day. And if your culture was only taught on one day, what would you think about the school that you were attending, right? Our culture isn't just one day, your culture isn't one day, but we have to have a special day for it in order for people to recognize. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So hopefully you kind of understand where we're going with this. And we're like, well, how can we create an approach that is every kid every day, right? And without it taking up too much time, because we still have these standards, we still have the assessment that we have to prepare for, but how do we meet the needs of our students culturally, emotionally, socially, and still get them ready for the assessment, right? And so how do we combine these things together? So we had a better idea, which was in the lesson plan, you have, just as you have your accommodations for your IEP students, right? And now we've kind of taken this perspective, well, we're accommodating every student all the time because they all learn differently. I have these kiddos in my class and their IEPs, and this is the law, and I do have to address this as well very specifically. But I'm constantly accommodating all my students in their levels, right? But then how do I do that culturally, socially, emotionally as well? And so then we had this idea that we got to put that into the lesson every single day. So we're writing our lesson plans. How am I addressing culture? How am I addressing their social and emotional needs? And so that's kind of how it came about in, you know, why should I teach culture every day? So this was something that we kept asking ourselves. So how do we help pre-service teachers to better understand the importance of that? So what I'd like to do right now is have you discuss this question in breakout rooms. And so if you haven't been in a breakout room yet, I'm going to, can I do it? Actually.
Hold on, I think I have to make you a co-host. And
Well,
I
you
don't,
could do it. You could do it too,
yeah,
and just.
I'll just go ahead and make the groups, and I'll also, at that time, I think I can make you a co-host. How many people would you like to be in a group?
I mean, however many people we have, you know, 2, 3, you know,
Okay.
3 is good. 3 is a good number.
Okay. And then we'll,
So why or should or how are we teaching culture every day? You should still be able to see the chat box, and I can put that in there. Hopefully you guys have access to the PowerPoint as well. I know that's a lot to kind of
so
multitask.
when I've done this before, people didn't have access to the chat room, to the chat when they're in the rooms.
Okay.
But at the bottom of your screen, you'll have a little ask for help, just in case you have a question for your group. But why don't we have somebody in your group record your ideas, and then when we come back, you can just all throw them into the chat box. How's that?
Perfect.
We'll do that. Okay, JC, do you want me to, you're gonna be put into a room just automatically, but you can go if you want, or you can stay out if you want.
That's perfect. I love it.
All right, so how long are we doing this, JC?
I would say we'll come back at 5:26 or 7.
Okay.
I always like to give warning too. So do you know how to give the announcement?
Yes.
So a couple
Yeah.
more minutes, and then we'll come back, and then they have a minute. And
Yeah.
I would say we come back at 5:28.
Okay, so I'll open all the rooms. There we go. I probably should put that question into the thingy. So JC, what was the question again? And I'll broadcast that out. Sorry, I should have been paying attention. What is it, Kyle? Oh, because she's already gone.
No, I mean like.
Do you remember
how
what the-
do we introduce culture like every day?
How do we, why is this all weird? Oh, here we go. Why or how? Why?
How, why? I think she did mention like how and why.
I think it was teach culture every day. Yeah. Okay, one of you want to take notes, or do you want me? I can type. Oh,
Hi, Melanie. I just have
Hi.
a question.
yeah, go ahead.
I was out of the room and my partner also doesn't know what we were supposed to be doing.
Okay, I just broadcast a message. So you are talking about the question, Why should we teach culture every day?
Okay.
And I would also add in like how, like
Okay.
other ideas on how. Yep,
That
that's
sounds
the
great.
goal. Yeah, no
Thank you
problem.
so much.
Okay. I know this is like, how do we do this? I can just type it right into the chat. So what are your thoughts? Yeah, why? Why should we teach culture every day? Mm,
Like when we see people, like people with different cultural backgrounds or ways in college, just in general.
so it's like all students would feel respected. If every day we're just always kind of integrating aspects of culture that represent the students.
Like feel respected, included, and recognized.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like identity is a really big topic and it's very important, not just to me, but as minorities.
Valued and respected.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle, any ideas? I think like I think about I do a integration lesson where my students learn there's some really great books that have just short little couple paragraphs about plants and how different tribes use the plants, and it'll talk about the science, kind of aspects of the plants. And so I think in like a science content, by integrating little aspects of scientific aspects of cultures, right? They actually will have a broader, like scientific understanding of things like plants in that case, kind of thing. So we could say integrating content specific cultural knowledge or information can expand their understanding of the content and culture at the same time, maybe.
And this is really interesting how like different tribes or even different cultures look at one animal totally differently.
Mm-hmm.
Like for Northern Cheyenne, owl is totally like unlucky,
Mm.
but for a different tribe, it could be a lucky.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
I was learning that when I was in China, so I was in Shanghai, the weasel, I think it was, is very revered. They were talking about because we saw one like run across the road, and our driver said, "Oh, that's really good luck." And I was like, "Oh, that's super interesting,"
And you know the crow, the blackbird,
Yeah.
flying around all the for Chinese people, it's that luck.
Oh,
And
okay.
then when I first came here,
Yeah.
the very first day, like I was walking to the post office.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, bless myself.
So that's interesting because if we're integrating things like that every day, our students will understand each other better, right? Because now I just learned something about you. So it makes sense if we're walking along together, right? And a crow comes by, it's like I'm going to understand like how how that is perceived.
Yeah, and you know this is a very good point when you say like understand each other better. Because like for example, a lot of people. I mean I'm Chinese, so I know a little bit more. So like a lot of people will say, oh, Chinese students, they don't ask questions in class. They they look very serious, they look mean. I don't think we need to be mean or we don't want to ask this because how we taught back home and how we raise and and we don't talk to strangers, that kind of stuff. So that's why we overlook you. And I have come to a couple of times when I went to the mall and people look at me and they walk right past me and then they would say, hey, how can I help you, to the white people?
Wow. Yeah.
And
Wow.
then, like, a couple times.
Yeah.
So the first time I thought, okay, maybe
Right.
she didn't see me, I'm too short or whatever.
Right.
Like, it happened.
Wow.
So, and then I can understand, and like people will have stereotypes or
Yes.
all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. So this is a good part, like we know each other better.
Yes.
If I tell you why we don't ask questions in class,
Yeah.
then you will understand, oh, okay, then you will have more grace and
Yeah.
to those people that in class in the future. Oh, probably they're still listening to me, but they just was taught that way. That's
Yeah.
a good point. I like that.
Okay, there's that example. That's cool. I like that. Oh, it's 5:28. So I think I said minutes instead of minute. Oh, I'm not I type, but I make lots of typos when I'm typing because I'm just, yeah. So I always have to reread my emails really good because I'm like, oh, I just.
And then sometimes we are very with two files
Mm-hmm.
and we forgot to type a couple words in between.
Yeah.
Because we thought mentally we thought we typed it.
Yeah. Mm. Okay. So we have 4 groups. Okay.
I almost forgot about the identity tax activity. I love that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, I think we're all back. Looks just about. We got Chris back there. JC, do you want us to go through the groups and just have them kind of report out, or do we just want to put it in the chat? Okay, well, go ahead and put your ideas in the chat because then they'll be there, and we do have people who will be watching this later on the recording. But let's just choose one person from each group to kind of share out. So we'll start with group 1.
Oh, that was us, wasn't it?
I think so.
Music.
Okay. That's it from group 1?
We talked shop again, a
It's a
lot of
little
music
pitiful.
related things.
Music related things. That's exactly right.
No, but JC was very helpful and kind of gave us more insight than beyond what's just on OPI, because Chris and I both have utilized OPI's website and resources there too, and she broadened that even more, which was great.
Very cool.
Métis Powwow. I highly recommend it for music. It's good stuff. It's really good.
Somebody type that into the chat for us so that, okay, excellent, cool. Okay, group 2.
I think that was me and Crystal.
Okay, I don't remember.
we were having a little bit of trouble with our dogs who get
Oh,
very high maintenance right now. Mine is on lockdown at the moment. But anyway, when we were able to talk about it, we talked about why do we teach culture every day, or why should we, to bring an awareness of differences in others, different opinions and different ways of life, and also to prepare our students. We both live in small towns here in Montana with not a lot of diversity, but we'd like to prepare our students for life outside of this environment, and so they don't have so much culture shock when they go outside of their hometown. And then Crystal's husband wanted us to mention history. History.
I like it. Very cool. Thank you. Okay, group 3. Sorry, I
We
don't.
kind of talked about the how a little bit, like through relationships is a how, because you're not only, I mean, it's building, you're learning about them, but you're also building that, because that rigor before, relationships for rigor. So I think relationships is a huge thing, and you learn about culture, they learn about their own culture.
I kind of like how I feel JC's been a good model tonight about how she's sharing from her own experiences, kind of as a teacher, right? So I think that's important for our students to see us sharing from our cultures as models, kind of to kind of make it a safe place for them. So that's kind of goes with your relationship thoughts there. Okay, and group 4.
Rachel and I really focused on the why of every single day we should be teaching cultural. And she pointed out that it feels and seems and produces a more authentic understanding, a more authentic engagement, if this is something we're doing every single day rather than once a week or trying to fit it in whenever we can. So that's kind of the why. And then the how portion, we talked about cultural education as a process. And the first process is recognizing culture in your classroom. The next one would be like representing it. And then the final one would be, or the end goal is to celebrate it, and just how to incorporate those as we continue throughout the year.
Love that. And then we put some ideas in the chat thing from the room 305 here. So kind of why we talked about if we integrate the cultures of the students, they will feel more valued and respected just all the time, right? And then we kind of talked about how integrating content specific cultural knowledge or information can expand their understanding of that content and culture at the same time. So one examples I was giving was like learning about how different Native American tribes use plants is expanding everybody's understanding of plants and like in science, but also at the same time expanding their cultural knowledge and understanding. And then Chiwa really had a really great point, and she said, if we integrate how different people view different things that happen in life, students will understand each other better. And an example she gave is in her Chinese culture, seeing a crow is bad luck. So if she and I were walking together and she saw a crow and had a really like negative reaction, I would understand her better because I understand her cultural perspective for that. So.
And that is so interesting because we have a lot of crows here.
I know, right? That's what she was saying. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You think about us and black cats, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm still thinking and looking for that DVD, that music DVD that I use, and it'll come to me. I just have been on the remote learning side. I get to go back full time as a coach here very soon next week. We were not prepared as a district for how many students we were going to have in the remote setting. And so I was asked to fill in for a while. What I'd like to do now, hopefully I've given you a better idea. When we first started doing Indian education, people often, there was a couple things that would come to me and people would say, well, why do you call it Indian? And I've often approached the word Indian with a two-sided humor and reality kind of perspective. And people would say, well, why do you call it Indian education? And my joke now is, so bear with me. Well, back in 1972, when I made the law, I called it Indian education. No, that's just silly, right? But Indian, it wasn't a bad word to me. So on the more realistic side, when you look at people who have a problem with the word Indian, it's probably because they're associating it with something negative. Not that they're prejudiced or, you know, any racist or anything like that. They just viewed it as a negative thing. And my, you know, kind of thought on it is, why don't we move away from that being a negative thing? Whether it's a misnomer or not, it's what the law is called. And so I try to use, you know, I use words, I use Native American, I use American Indian, I use Indigenous, I use Indian. And so I try to use those as interchangeably as much as I can, but ask people what they prefer. And if you find out a student is American Indian in your classroom, you know, you can, what term do you prefer? Well, what would you like me to use? You know, we don't find that as much of a problem with other cultures, but sometimes, you know, because even the word black can be problematic, and I've always used black and I've never had an issue with that, but I see people cringe sometimes when I say that. And so it's just being aware of your audience and your kids and well, what would you like me to say? And we are the political correct kings of the world, and we have to tailor our lessons to our audience. So it's important to kind of be aware of those things. And so I just like to use them as interchangeably as possible. We're all indigenous to North America. And so it's hard. Like, what do you know, call people what they prefer to be called. If you're going to refer to me, you know, maybe say, you know, the Indian education lady, right? Because that's my title. Or, you know, my friend who's Little Shell or something like that. So if you can be tribally specific, that's good too. So that's a question that comes up and often came up. And I don't think that there is a correct way to answer that other than find out who your audience is and what they prefer, right? Especially if you're dealing with kids. And if you're dealing with a completely non-Indigenous population, maybe have them reach a census of a word that they're comfortable with to describe this culture. Maybe it's tribes of Montana. Maybe you have your own kind of descriptive word that it's the indigenous people of North America, you know, the indigenous people of Montana. And I think that that is fabulous too. So find a norm that works for you and your group, because you're creating a community and a team anyway. The other thing that I've kind of come up against and how we've tried to address it is, well, why don't we have Mexican American culture? And why don't we have, you know, German American culture or German Day? And my response to that is pretty straightforward, in the sense that this is the best way the government can address the genocide that existed in the United States of America without saying it's genocide. That's the reality of it for me. That's the reality of it for most Indigenous people, and the conversations that we have with each other. And we're just happy that there is an avenue and a means for people to bring those things into their classroom, and resources are available. And so when you're going to do lessons, it sounds like a lot of you have already kind of explored this topic, but so this will be interesting. I like Mike Jetty and I'm going to throw his name out there. I'm a name thrower. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so when people are going on their journey to find a lesson plan, how do you know about a culture if you've you aren't part of that culture. And so it's out there. And then there's some stuff out there that's not very good. And so the good, the bad, and the ugly is my favorite kind of perspective on this. And so this is a lesson. I hated to throw these organizations under the bus, but I have to, because this is a big name in Indian education. And so we're just going to do a little shout out because of time constraints. But does anybody want to kind of look at this and this lesson that is created? What kind of stands out to you as a good or bad or ugly? So if I were going to teach this lesson to my students, or you saw somebody teaching this, kind of critique it, really take a critical eye to it. Is there anything that stands out to you? It's good, bad, or ugly.
The past tense of everything. Because it's like, it's like they're talking like they're gone.
Right. This is a big name in education right here, isn't it? So if we're asking people
here before anybody, for other people came here.
Right. Who are these other?
Yeah, they don't belong here anymore. We're here now.
Right. It's interesting, isn't it? Here's the next one. Good, bad, ugly. And again, I hate to throw anybody under the bus, but these are big names in education. This is what you're going to get when you Google Native American lesson, right?
I'd have to assume that not all Native American tribes had access to corn to make cornbread. So is this popular with all? That's my thought.
Oh, I don't mean to laugh, but yes, right? You nailed it. You guys nailed both of those. You guys are fantastic. This is great. I'm pretty sure there's not corn in Arizona.
Well, this actually kind of hit home for me because I think it was my very first year teaching and just trying to stay afloat like most people.
Right. Well,
And then IEFA came and I took reference from another teacher and we did a song about grinding corn. And I think it was from like a generic music curriculum, but I think it was very broad like this too. And I think it's because I remember it being like, oh, well, which tribe did this? It didn't even say, I don't think. So.
Yeah, and this one, when you dive deeper into stuff, it's not too bad. Like this, if we were going to say the good, the bad, and the ugly, this one's not too bad. It could be worse. I mean, if we're going to go back to this one, this is pretty ugly by our standards, right? And there's nothing we can do about this. There's nothing I can do about this as an Indigenous person to keep this from being there, right? Not too bad, but yeah, the corn. I mean, we have to think about that. So that's good. And then, so this one, it appears on the surface to be better, right? Primary source documents, music law, and everyday life, cultures today, right? And so I do this with students. I go find stuff and I Google it for them. And then, oh, sorry, I don't know why I just did that. So the next thing I do is I have them start to Google stuff, right? And so I have them Google these words, white American, and look for the images. And if you do this on your own, you might be very, very surprised at what you see. And then these are the kinds of questions that I ask. And so I just wanted to give you some other just tangible things. And these are ideas that something that you can do and explore with, and we're not going to do here today, but it's something I do with my students because I really want them to start thinking about the images and the media and the things that they're presented with in their everyday lives. And if you Google these things and you'll be very surprised. And it'll be the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like what you just saw with the lesson plans. And so, you know, where do I begin? We've already kind of talked about this. So you have these levels. So I have contributions, and every content area is going to have different levels, but everything is building upon each other. So you have contributions, but please don't make fry bread and call it Indian Ed, right? Because fry bread isn't even traditional cultural food. Now, you can do fry bread, and that would be fantastic. But if you want to make it transformative, let's talk about the history, right? Because fry bread was made and is a testament to the resiliency of Indian people, because the grandmas took the rations that the United States government was giving us when they were trying to starve us on the reservations, or starve us to get us to go back to the reservations. And we used the wheat and yeast and oil that they gave us so that we could survive, and we made fry bread. And so for 120 years, we've had fry bread as a result, but it's not a traditional food. It's a result of the rations that the United States government was giving our people after the extermination of the bison, okay? And so I just took a contributions lesson and turned it into transformative by giving the history behind it. But don't get me wrong, because everybody, I don't know anybody that doesn't love fry bread. I mean, maybe you don't, I don't want to say everybody, but we all have our, you know, we'll work for fry bread shirts, or, you know, fry bread or die, or, you know, whatever it is, because I love fry bread. It's very, very good. But if you try to get a lesson or a recipe from a grandma and she doesn't give it to you, that's partly because, don't be offended, okay? Some of the things in our culture are sacred, and it's sacred for a couple reasons. Sometimes it's because we're scared to give away our secrets, but sometimes it's just because another reason is we want you to earn it. You know, that's part of our culture. I apologize for that, but that's just the way that it is. We gave a lot of stuff away. We have a culture that's called a giving culture. Our economy and economists actually call it a gift-giving culture. And so if you're ever offered something by somebody who is, you know, tribal or Native American, and you know they are, you're supposed to accept it, you know, and eat it. So, you know, if you're offered candy bars, no matter how much you don't want those candy bars, you better eat them. You better, you know, take that fry bread that they give you and pretend to like it, because it's a total insult if you don't, because we have a gift-giving culture. And I'm just trying to joke around with you guys a little bit, because joking is another way that it's part of our culture. Joke is part of our culture. We have teasing clans, we have teasing societies, depending on what culture you're from or what tribe you're from, but it's a big part of who we are. It was very, very strange when I went to a non-traditional funeral and people weren't laughing and joking, but that's not true with all funerals, right? Because some funerals, it's very, very somber and sad and really intense, right? But some of our funerals are laughing and joking and having a good time. And I went to a funeral that was not in a traditional from my dad's side of the family, and I was laughing and making jokes, and they were all looking at me very strange. So joking is a big part of our family. If somebody's teasing you, that means they like you. And that might not necessarily be part of just exclusively to Indigenous culture. So you can, by giving the contribution, you can make it transformative and beyond the additive by putting and understanding and putting the culture in, or the history in there, and understanding where something comes from. This decision-making and social action approach, we can't make anybody do that, you know, and this is gonna come more, I mean, talk to a government teacher, they're gonna tell you, I can't make kids vote, I can register them, but I can't make them vote, right? And so those, we're hoping to inspire them to be active civic members of their communities, we can't make them do that. So we can give them the contributions and turn it into transformative, but they have to make the decision for themselves. And so this is, you know, you choose your lesson, but how can I make it into more transformative? So there's the link there as well. And so if you're more interested in how to kind of get there, there's the link there. And so I gave you that, you know, Google those images, right? And you'll be really kind of, so it was actually, I just did it not very long ago and did it with the kids this week. And I didn't even realize that it was a thing. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but I implore you to explore this. I invite you to explore this topic. So how do I become more culturally responsive? Take the journey with your kids. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. Let's find out together, right? So this is a great article, 4 ways to begin to change the narrative about American Indians in K-12 instruction. Please do not call on Native students. So this is just kind of my tidbit. You know, don't look to the Native kid as the token Indian in the classroom. They might not even experience or have the culture in, or their family might not even identify. And so you have to hopefully create an environment where they want to share. Kids might not ever want to share. But if you know a kid is Native, please don't call on them. If they want to share, they can share, but don't put kids as the token Indian in the classroom, or for any culture. You know that they're from the Amish community, or you know that they're Latino. Don't call on them to be the token Latino. Well, where did your family immigrate here? Are you part of the Dream Act? Like, that would be really irresponsible. So please don't do that. And I know none of you are going to do that, so I'm not worried about it. So use your OPI resources. Mike Jetty and Jennifer Statham are there for you. I'm more than happy to try to, you know, what I'll do is I'll just give you a bunch and hopefully send you, and hopefully something resonates with you. And then you can follow it. And then later, as you become more comfortable, you can add craft and philosophy and those kinds of things into what it is that you're teaching. I highly encourage you to use the Evaluating American Indian Resources and Materials in your classroom, because it really is a very good guide to evaluate and look at DVDs, textbooks, how I'm approaching this material. And I feel like there should be a class just on this and just approaching cultural material in general in college for teachers, because our textbooks are not the be all and end all of what we're going to teach, especially in a history classroom. Challenge your misconceptions and ask your students to do the same. I love this resource, American Indian 101 Frequently Asked Questions. I jigsaw this with my students. I have them, different groups take different parts of it, and they talk about these different misconceptions. And then, like, I know beforehand going in, I have the facts, and I'm like, okay, here's a resource on this, and here's a resource on this, and here's a resource on this. And no, we don't get money. Where's my check? I mean, I don't get money from the government. So no, I don't have free college. I had student loans just like anybody else. I could apply for those grants, and yes, I might have a higher chance because they give 3 to Little Shell tribal members a year to MSU Billings, right? But that's just like anything else. It's a scholarship just like anything else. I just happen to be American Indian, so I get these scholarships that go to different universities. And so that's just a couple of things that are in there. We don't pay state taxes if you are a registered tribal member and live on the reservation, but you do pay federal taxes. That's always kind of a surprise to people, because they hear that we don't pay taxes. We do pay federal, but not state. We don't pay state taxes. So that means no income taxes for tribal members that live on a reservation. Learn the tribes, their names, and what they call themselves, where they are located, and some of their history. I missed history in there. And so there's a document there as well. It's pretty extensive. It's about 75 pages. But the more you can know, I don't expect you to be able to pronounce Absalica or Tehista or anything like that. Took me years to even just feel comfortable to say those names. But if you can try and say, oh, I'm going to try to say it, guys, even if you don't have Indigenous students in the classroom, they're still going to like it. They'd love to watch you make a fool out of yourself. So I would encourage you to, try as much as you can to be as authentic, as to take a page out of their book, be your authentic self. These are just some of my go-to resources. I love the videos on Montana tribes, Essential Understandings, Office of the Governor. This is just general information that's really good just for everyday people. I encourage people like travelers, family members. It's just good, cut and dry, straight to the point kind of stuff. Smithsonian has fantastic stuff. They've come to Montana for advice. South Dakota Office of Indian Education is everything, Sioux, that you could ever want to know about the Lakota, the Dakota, and the Nakota. Amazing resource. And if you don't know South Dakota's history and the Sioux, I would encourage you to read as much as you can about the Black Hills and everything that happened in the Great Sioux Wars. Native Voices, and then Washington. Oh, this is Alaska, and then this is Washington. So some great, and of course my website, right? I love my website. It's not totally and completely together yet, but it has lots of great resources. My favorite resource, the Essential Understandings, teachers, elementary, middle school. We're just going to click on this. Ooh, I'm going to go to, let's see if I have my art stuff here. I might have it there. I don't. So, oh, it's just being slow.
So although this is through Billing Public Schools, I see, and Google, it's still open to anybody who can.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Okay.
I have a couple things in here that are closed, but everything is.
And I'm just going to make an announcement because it is 6. So if people do need to go, I just want to say thank you to JC so much. Let's give her a round of applause. I know she can't all hear us. But I'm going to let you continue because if there's people who want to stay and ask more questions and get more information, we'll do that.
Yep, and I am going to open it up if anybody wants to. I was hoping that music piece was in here that I was working with the group, but it's not. Like, I don't even know what it is. So I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, I was trying to go really fast. I was looking at I had my little countdown here, and I'm like, oh God, yay, I got through the whole thing, yay. So.
Oh, yeah. Anybody have any other questions for JC before we kind of close off? Is it possible if I... Yep, so Chiwa wants to know, is it okay if she could just send you an email and ask you questions or get resources?
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely.
And I'll post her email into the module that will have resources for this seminar.
And I think I already kind of helped somebody. I don't remember who it was.
Yes, there was somebody who reached out and yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, it was very cool. All right, everybody. If you have questions about, your EPG or anything that's going on, just let me know, okay?
Then I'm going to email you, it'll be random, the music that I was talking about. It's more for them. You could use it in your classroom as well. As soon as it comes to me, I'll email you the link so that you guys can, and then you can forward it to your music people. So.
Yay. Thank you, JC.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Okay, you too. See you all later.
Bye.
Bye. It's really interesting how you guys just mentioned about